Story time about how my dad was on the news and now everybody knows my last name. So a little background information. This all happened whenever I was in 6th grade. This all happened on a Tuesday night. So I had school the next day. Well, my dad had went to work earlier in the day. Well, around 10 o'clock at night, we hadn't heard from my dad all day, which was super weird for him because he was always home around 10 o'clock. And even if he wasn't, he still would have kept in contact with us and let us know where he was at. So at this point, my family and I were really scared, and we're thinking that something happened to him. I was calling and texting him, my mom was calling and texting him. My whole family was pretty much trying to get a hold of him. Like, we had called all the hospitals to see if he was there. We called police stations to see if he might have been in jail or if they had his last name in the system. So nobody had heard or seen from him. So we all went to sleep that night hoping that he would show up in the morning. So the next day after I got home from school, my mom came home from work and she had told me about this phone call that she got. Like for part 2. Part 2 of how my dad was on the news and now everybody knows my last name. So like I said, my mom had gotten home from work and she told me about this phone call that she got while she was at work. So apparently one of her coworkers called her and said, "Hey, I think I saw your husband on the news." So after that, she showed me the news article and I couldn't even believe what I was reading. So I guess my dad had been drinking and he went to an auto repair shop and stole a car because I guess the keys were left in the door of the car. And what makes this even worse, the car that he stole had 2 guns in the trunk. And they weren't 2 pistols, these were 2 big ass guns that were fucking loaded. Oh wait, I forgot something. So before this, he had been at the strip club and somehow he ended up in pink lingerie. Guys, I cannot make this shit up. So he was driving around and he decided to park right in the middle of an intersection and it was literally causing a whole fucking scene. There were people with their kids worried as hell. So after that, a few people called the cops, like for part 3. Part 2 about how my dad was on the news and now everybody knows my last name. So like I said, my dad parked in the middle of an intersection and people were calling the cops. So when the police arrived, my dad was half passed out in the car. This happened in like the middle of broad day, like there's traffic everywhere. So when they finally get up to the car, my dad is literally slumped in the driver's seat. There was a bottle of whiskey in the door and it was completely empty. When they went to arrest him, he started resisting. He was screaming a bunch of profanities at them and started kicking them, threatening them with guns, which made the situation worse because my dad had no clue that there were any guns in the back of the car. So that just made the police think that they were his. So they take my dad to jail and he has like 7 charges against him. But we were happy because we knew where he was. Well, the worst part is, so the next day when I went to school, people were coming up to me asking if that was my dad on the news. Some people were even making fun of me because of what he did. And that's really fucking embarrassing for a 12-year-old. But it's okay, Dad, I still love you.
Story time about how I pretended to be deaf the entire quarantine. When quarantine started, I started an online course for a few subjects. To provide some background, these aren't my school classes or anything and I've never met these people before. There are maybe 10 other kids in the class and the teacher is actually pretty great. So the first 2 days go pretty well, but on the 3rd day I mess up big time. We were in between a physics class that had already been going on for an hour and I'd completely gotten distracted halfway through. I have an incredibly low attention span and this was already too much for me. When the teacher called my name to answer his question, I had no idea what he'd been talking about, so I tried to Google it. However, I have shitty internet, so it took a really long time to load and the teacher was getting pissed as to why I wasn't responding and why I was typing. So completely freaking out, I decided to text him on the Google Meet chat and make an excuse that my laptop's audio and microphone weren't working that day, and I'd been reading the subtitles which took a long time to load, so I hadn't quite gotten to his question. In my immense panic, I phrased it somewhat vaguely and said, "I can't actually hear. I've been reading the subtitles and they take a long time to load." To which the instructor said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I wasn't aware that you're deaf." In my intense panic and anxiety, I just went along with it. Dumb as hell, I know. It actually worked out fine. I tap out all the answers that were sent to me and even bought a hearing aid sometimes and wore it in class. Now I say sometimes because I don't actually have the focus and commitment to remember to put it on every class. When asked about it, I told people in the class that even with the hearing aid, I can't hear much, so I don't usually bother wearing it. They bought it. Everyone in class liked me a lot and they found me very endearing. There's a girl, Carla, who said I had the most beautiful smile she's ever seen. So this was actually going really well for me. But like most of my antics, this backfired on me big time. When I made this godforsaken decision all that time ago, I was sure I'd get away with it. However, about a week ago, the instructor decided to meet in real life and the lockdown in my country had been lifted. I spent all night watching videos and figuring out how to behave. I decided to pretend to also be completely dumb so I wouldn't have to speak in sign. It seemed very hard and I didn't want to try. So anyway, we meet up and everything goes well. No one uncovers my secret or anything. I spend the entire in real life meet with Carla, who's completely freaking stunning in real life. She's smart, funny, and she's kind. We keep handing each other notes on tissue papers and it's the cutest shit ever. I haven't been this attracted to anyone in my entire life. Toward the end of the meet, however, Carla hands me a tissue paper with one little heartbreaking sentence on it. "Will you date me?" That's when panic sets in. Part 2 of how I pretended to be deaf the entire quarantine. After pretending to be deaf in my class the entire quarantine and being asked out by a girl I fell for in the class, I panicked. I told her that I needed time to think and she was chill with it. So basically I prepared really hard for the date. I googled what the appropriate flowers for apologizing for your lives are and got her white orchids. I then put on my best clothes and set out. She came to the date with a cute little notepad and 2 pencils for us to write notes in, which melted me instantly. But I was so anxious and nervous at first that I couldn't bring myself to tell her. However, as we sat there waiting for our order to arrive, I kind of snapped because of the guilt and scribbled down into the notebook, "Hey, there's not an easy way to break this, but I'm not actually deaf. Or dumb." To which she replied with, "I know you're not deaf, but you are pretty dumb," with a smiley face. At which point I said, "What the F?" out loud. She then laughed and explained that she thought I was so cute that she Googled me long ago and found my Instagram, which has highlighted stories from concerts where I'm screaming and vibing. So she only asked me out to figure out how long I'd keep it going. So she was actually playing me the whole time. I was feeling pretty bummed that she only wanted to date me for that, but nevertheless, I apologized profusely and explained everything. I told her that I totally understand if she wants to end the date now, but she didn't. We had a great time and aren't officially dating or anything, but we do have a second date planned. She also told me that while she understands why I did what I did and that anxiety, especially social anxiety, is so hard to deal with, but she also believes that I was a little offensive, especially with the hearing aid. She explained to me why that was so insensitive, and I'd like to apologize for anyone that I might have offended. It really wasn't my intention. Also, for our second date, we're planning to volunteer at a center for deaf kids so I can redeem myself. I'm also learning the basics of sign language for the visit next week.
Story time about why you should never, ever, ever do drugs. So a little background information. In my town, on the 15th of June this year, 2 girls got kidnapped in my hometown. So I kind of knew these 2 girls. I mean, they went to my school, but that was really it. Because low-key, I didn't want to be friends with them, and I kind of hated them. They were in 7th grade, I was in 8th grade, so they were probably like a year younger than me. Anyway, so it was a Wednesday, and the last time they had been seen was at 8 p.m. with a 30-year-old man. They were supposedly doing drugs outside of a McDonald's. Well, I guess this man saw that they had been doing drugs, and he wanted some. Before that, I guess he kind of eased into the question because he was like talking to them, getting to know them, and I guess he thought he had a really good shot at getting some drugs. But when he asked, they said no. So then he asked a few more times and they finally gave them to him. But whenever they got closer, he grabbed both of them, put him in his van, and drove off. And he hid them in his house. Like for part 2. Part 2 of why you should never, ever, ever do drugs. So like I said, he asked for them again, and finally the girls decided to give him some. But when they got closer, he grabbed both of them and shoved them in his van, drove off. Well, he ended up driving to his house and decided to hide them there. Well, one of the girl's aunts posted something on Facebook saying that both of them were missing. And soon, the news made an article that literally said, "Drug addict and her friend gets kidnapped." They went missing for like 6 days, and on the 22nd of June, they were found. But now they won't stop bragging about how fun it was to get kidnapped. And that is why, still to this day, I absolutely despise these girls.